Hey, and welcome back. So what you'll notice is that I have these coherent actions here, right? And so my coherent actions for phase one, with my goal of forming a hypothesis around potential MVP, is to interview 5 aspiring PMs, 5 technical recruiters, and 5 PM leaders. We've been through this several times, right? But how does this translate into your roadmap? Well, let's go to RoadMonk. You can use RoadMonk. There's a 14-day free trial. It's really nice. In Miro, there's roadmap templates that you can use. But RoadMonk's pretty popular, and I use it in my day job. So I just figured I'd throw it in here so you could see it. All right. So I created different lanes here, and you can set up your roadmaps in different ways, right? I could have created this as like my phase one strategy and then created the initiatives accordingly, which I'll probably do that, show you what a roadmap looks like in either phase two or phase three, as I kind of go through the process of what it took to build Path to Product and how I use this strategy framework to focus my efforts in doing so to get Path to Product off the ground in less than a year, right? So going through this, we know that one of them is we need to create an interview guide. I don't have that on the Miro board framework. But before we conduct interviews, you need to create an interview guide. And like I said before, if you want more insight on how to do this, go to pathtoproduct.io and sign up for the product management experience course, where we'll go through that in detail. But after that's created, we need to identify aspiring PMs to interview. So we need to go find out where they are. Like, how do we identify who these people are? And then once we know where they are, then we need to schedule 5 calls, right? So if you can identify them, get in touch with them, and get them to agree to a call, then you got to schedule your 5 calls, right? Then we got to execute the interviews. And then lastly, we need to document the common threads, right? Because that is what we need to do according here, right? The goal is to get enough insights to form a hypothesis. And we need to acquire universally relevant insights, right? So in the 5 interviews that we have, we really need to go to a diverse audience around the world. And the guiding policy is think global and identify common threads. So we need to document those common threads once we find them, right? And so here's an example of a roadmap. I threw this together in like less than a half hour. And you'll probably see different ways you can set this up in terms of what your roadmap looks like, which I'll show later on as we went into the actual like build phase. You won't see things running in parallel like this. This was pretty unique to the discovery, like the initial discovery part of building this out. Typically, you'll see some work going on, and then maybe in another lane, some work going on down here, and then some work going on up here, and you won't see a whole lot of overlap. Sometimes you will, especially like the way I do it in my day job. I'll have work that the development team's working on in one lane, and then I'll have maybe work that our designer's working on here, which kind of reflects the Jira board as we use Jira. But I'll have a lane for my discovery work of things that I'm doing in product discovery that runs in parallel for discovering different things, while it runs in parallel to what we're actually executing on from previous discovery work. So there's a lot of different ways to set up roadmap, but just an example of how those coherent actions translate into your roadmaps. That way, if people want to look into your roadmap to see what you're doing, that'll align back to the coherent actions, which aligns to the strategy. And you can bring both of these. You can bring RoadMonk, or you can bring your Miro template, and you can say, okay, so these are the coherent actions. If you wanted to do these not in parallel, but say the first thing we need to do is interview 5 aspiring PMs. You can come to the roadmap and have that as like your first thing, right? So if you wanted to narrow this down to one section and just say phase one strategy, then you would see interview 5 aspiring PMs. And one of the cool things you can do is you can create sub items. right? So I can make this one thing the interview, so like the coherent action. And then as I broke these out into different tasks, you can actually do the same thing here where you can add sub items as tasks. So you could say, you know, create the interview guide as a task, identify the 5 interviewees, so on and so forth. So there's different ways you can leverage this. It just depends on what makes sense to you or what your company likes, or what makes sense from like a presentation standpoint, because these tools really are only as good as how effective they are for the purpose for which you use them, right? Which is communication, visibility, alignment, those kind of things. So I hope that helps. And you'll see another example of this later on in the course as we get into kind of the build out section. So as we go through the different phases, phase 2, you'll see the actual work we did on the MVP, actually building out the MVP. And then phase 3, you'll see what we did for launch and the strategy that we had going into launch, or the pre-launch strategy. Okay. So with that, we went through everything on phase 1, the goal, how that aligns to your mission, the challenge we need to overcome to get to the goal, the guiding policy to focus our effort for tackling the challenge, the coherent actions that are within those constraints to be focused towards what we're trying to do, and the expected outcomes of what those are. So next step for us is we're going to go into phase 2 and show how product strategy is really a fluid thing, right? You're only done with your strategy when you accomplish your goal. So at this point for Path to Product, we gathered enough insight. This was probably sometime in the summer of 2020. We had enough insight to form a hypothesis around what our MVP can be. So I'll share with you what that was as we go into phase 2 of what comes next. So I'll see you there.